caves have always been portals between what we know and what we fear to know. The moisture of the walls, the echo that distorts each sound, the darkness that swallows the light, places where the limits between myths and reality fade. Tonight we travel to the heart of Texas, where the caves of Longhorn keep secrets that no one should discover. Stories of ancestral cults, inexplicable disappearances, and blood rituals that go back to times forgotten by official history. Have you ever felt that shiver on the back of your neck, as if something was watching you from the shadows? Have you heard whispers that seem to come from nowhere? It is exactly this feeling that inhabits the depths of Austin's caves, where time seems to stop and something very old and very hungry waits for unsuspecting visitors. Welcome to a journey for the darkest underground in Texas. I am Sam Houston, and in this episode we discover the bloody secrets of what happens when ordinary people venture where they should not. A warning: the stories you are about to listen are based on real reports and can disturb the most sensitive. If you have had an inexplicable experience in the depths of some abandoned cave or place, share your story with us. Now light a light, because the darkness is about to wrap you. Hello. I have observed strange phenomena all over my life, but what I have witnessed in the caves of Longhorn pursues me to this day. I am a geologist and work with cave mapping for the Texas Natural Resources Department for almost 15 years. I went through hundreds of underground formations, from small cracks to complex cave systems that extend for miles, but nothing compares to what I found there. Longhorn Caves are approximately 30 minutes from the Austin Center on a private property surrounded by old oaks and rock formations. Most local residents know only the tourist part, which has been mapped in the 70s and has received visitors since then. What few know is that there is a much longer network of tunnels that branch beyond allowed areas. In March 2021, I received a call from the current landowner. He had found a strange opening while expanding his property, something that was not on any official map. He asked me to investigate before contacting the authorities, as he feared bureaucratic complications if it was significant. I got there on a Tuesday morning. The owner, Mr. Whitaker, a 70-year-old man with a look that indicated that he had seen too much things in his life, guided me to the newly discovered area. I found this when the excavator broke a limestone wall, he explained as we walked through rugged terrain. I have never seen anything like it, and look that I have known every centimeter of this land for 40 years. The opening was small but clearly artificial. Unlike the natural cave inputs, it had tool marks on the edges, as if it had been sealed intentionally and then reopened by the excavator. Hidden by dense vegetation and rock blocks, it was impossible to see unless you knew exactly where to look. Equipped with my helmet, extra flashlights, and mapping equipment, I prepared to enter. Mr. Whitaker would be on the surface as my contact basic security protocol for cave exploration. "Be careful," he said, with seriousness that seemed excessive. "There are stories about these lands that we don't tell tourists." I ignored the comment, thinking it is just local superstition. After checking my equipment, I entered the opening, which was soon widened in a tunnel of approximately 2 meters high. The walls had a strange texture. Instead of the natural roughness of limestone, they seemed to have been smoothed, and, as I descended, I noticed something even more disturbing. Symbols carved in the rock. They were not modern graffiti or even indigenous rock art that we often found in Texas caves. They were precise geometric shapes, spirals and patterns that resembled constellations, interspersed with what seemed to be an old writing that I did not recognize. I took pictures and kept going down, curiosity surpassing the growing sense of discomfort. After about 50 meters, the tunnel flowed into a wide circular chamber with a dome ceiling of approximately 20 meters high. My flashlight could not illuminate the whole space. In the center of the chamber there was a structure that froze my blood. A perfectly sculpted stone altar with carved channels that converged to a central receptacle. It did not need to be an anthropologist to recognize an altar of sacrifice. Around the altar, arranged in a perfect circle, there were 12 columns of stone with the same symbols of the tunnel, but much more elaborate. The floor had a thin layer of red powder that, when examining more closely, looked like iron oxide, or at least that's what I expected to be. The camera had 5 additional tunnels, all coming out radially like the fingers of one hand. As I contemplated which one explore first, I heard something, a low, rhythmic sound, like a distant drum. Initially, I thought it was the echo of water dripping somewhere in the cave, but the pace was too regular, almost deliberate. I decided to follow the tunnel where the sound seemed to come from. As I advanced, the symbols on the walls were denser and the channels carved on the deeper floor, as if they had been worn by the constant flow of some liquid. The sound was also clearer. It was definitely not dripping water. It was a rhythmic beat followed by something that looked almost a song. After about 200 meters, the tunnel widened in another chamber, smaller than the first but much more disturbing. On the walls there was what I can only describe as representations of rituals, humanoid figures around an altar similar to that of the previous chamber. But these figures had elongated heads and disproportionate limbs. Above them, something with wings was prominently portrayed, not an angel, definitely not an angel. At the center of this chamber there was another altar, but this one had something different. I approached cautiously, illuminating every detail. At the top there were recent dark marks and, around the base, objects that did not belong to a prehistoric cave. Melted candles, feathers, small bones that looked like animals, and, more disturbing, which seemed to be a partially burned Polaroid photograph. While examining these items, the rhythmic sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. I felt the air heavier, as if the cave itself is holding its breath. My flashlight blinked twice, and then, for a terrible second, erased completely. At that moment of total darkness, I heard a whisper, not an echo, not the wind. A clearly articulated whisper, though in a language I did not recognize. When my light came back, a second later, I was alone, but with the undeniable feeling that something had been very close to me. With hands shaking, I turned on my radio to contact Mr. Whitaker on the surface. Only static answered. I decided it was time to leave and go back with a full team. As I turned to return through the tunnel, I noticed something I had not noticed before: footprints on the ground dust. Recent human footprints that were not mine. Someone or something had been there recently. And worse, the footprints didn't go to the exit. They came from the deepest tunnels and disappeared in the direction where I had entered. The way back was an adrenaline and fear blur. At some point, I heard the sound of movement behind me, something quickly dragging on through the tunnels. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. When I finally emerged from the entrance, the afternoon sun almost blinded me. Mr. Whitaker was sitting on a nearby stone with a strange expression. "You were down there almost 5 hours ago," he said, checking his watch. Impossible. My own watch showed that I had spent less than 2 hours in the cave. When I explained what he had found, his face paled. "That's why that part of the property has never been developed," he finally confessed. "My grandfather found that entrance in the 1930s. After he entered there, it was never the same. He said they scored." "They who?" I asked, still trying to rationalize everything he had witnessed. "Those who came before. Those who are still down there. He said they are not dead. Just waiting." Mr. Whitaker then lifted the sleeve from his shirt, revealing a mark inside the forearm. A spiral surrounded by symbols identical to those I had seen on the cave walls. "Once they know you, you are never really alone," he said, downloading his sleeve. "I thought it was just an old man's ramblings, until people began to disappear." He then told me about the 3 disappearances in the last 50 years, amateur explorers, college students who ventured on the property without permission and were never seen again. The official searches never gave anything, because the entrance was well hidden, and Mr. Whitaker, following his grandfather's instructions, never revealed his existence. "My grandfather said they collect people," he continued, "for rituals, to feed something that lives a lot, much deeper than anyone has already managed to go." As he spoke, I noticed something on the floor near the cave entrance, footprints coming out, which weren't mine. Footprints that ended abruptly after a few meters, as if the one who had done them simply disappeared in the air. Mr. Whitaker followed my gaze and nodded severely. "They sometimes go out at night. They never go away from the entrance. It's like they can't." I informed the authorities about the discovery, obviously omitting the most fantastic details. A team from the local university came to investigate, classifying the site as a possible prehistoric ceremonial site. The entrance was sealed for preservation. The official report mentioned only artifacts of cultural meaning and possible area of indigenous rituals. What did not enter the report was what happened the night before the arrival of the archaeological team. I was staying in a small hotel in Austin, reviewing my notes and photos. Around 3 a.m., I woke up with the feeling of being observed. In the corner of the room, partially hidden in the shadows, was a figure too high to be human, too thin, with long and disproportionate members. Just like the figures represented on the cave walls. She didn't move, she didn't speak. Just noted. When I finally managed to move and light the light, there was nothing there. But in the bathroom mirror, written with what seemed to be red mud, was one of the symbols I had photographed in the cave. The next morning I discovered a mark on my forearm. The same spiral that Mr. Whitaker had shown me. A doctor later assured me that it was just an unusual allergic reaction, probably to something I contacted in the cave. Since then, I have dreams. Dreams of tunnels that come down much deeper than I explore, of huge cameras where crowds gather around altars, something gigantic that moves in the deepest darkness, something that is too old to have a name. And sometimes late at night, when I'm alone, I hear that whisper again. They say words that I do not understand, but somehow I understand. They are calling me back, saying that I have a place reserved on the altar, that I am part of something larger and older than humanity itself. That's why I changed Austin. That's why I changed my career. But a few nights, like this one I'm telling you this story, I feel an almost irresistible momentum to return, to descend those tunnels again and go to the end to see what you are waiting in the depths. Because now I know, the entrance was not sealed to keep people out. It was sealed to keep something inside, something that can occasionally find a way to go out. And mark those you choose. The Call That No One Answers, by Janet Caldwell. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas, and always had a complicated relationship with local caves. My father was a tour guide in the caves of Longhorn when I was a child, so I grew up exploring the safe parts of that underground world. He always warned us, to me and my brothers, never to venture beyond the areas designated for tourists. The caves are much longer than people imagine, he said, and some places are dangerous not only for the risk of collapse, but for other reasons. When we asked what reasons, he changed the subject. In adolescence, like any rebel without cause, I began to be interested in what was forbidden. Along with some school friends, I started exploring the cave official tickets, always on weekends when surveillance was smaller. It was in one of these explorations in 2018 that I had my first experience with what I now call the call. We were five: me, my best friend Claire, her boyfriend Ethan, and two swim team boys, Marcus and Dylan. Equipped with flashlights, makeshift helmets, and a lot of youthful audacity, we went through a crack in the rock that was almost a kilometer from the main entrance of the caves of Longhorn. The fissure led to a narrow tunnel that opened in several connected chambers. We were in unexplored territory, at least for us, and the thrill of discovery propelled us deeper and deeper. After about an hour of exploration, we reached a larger chamber with a small underground lake of crystal clear water. "Let's stop here and eat something," suggested Claire, opening her backpack to get the snacks we had brought. As we ate, sitting around our lanterns like a fire, we started to hear something strange. A sound that we initially confused with the echo of dripping water, but gradually proved differently. It was too rhythmic, almost like music. "Are you listening to this?" I asked. The others nodded, suddenly seriously. "It seems to come," said Marcus, pointing to a narrow passage in the back of the chamber that we had not noticed before. The sound was hypnotizing, a kind of low song, accompanied by a percussion that seemed to be hollow, perhaps bones or wood. There were no distinguishable words, just a melody that, the more we heard, the more familiar it seemed. "It must be the sound system in the tourist area," suggested Ethan, but we all knew we were too far from the public area to be possible. "Let's check," said Dylan, already getting up. Something in me screamed not to go back immediately, but teenage curiosity is a powerful force. We followed the narrow passage, which leaned down at an uncomfortable angle. The sound became clearer with each step. After about 10 minutes of difficult walk, the passage opened in another chamber, this clearly unnatural. The walls were very regular, almost perfectly circular, and covered with carved symbols in the rock. In the center there was what seemed to be a stone altar with channels that converged to a central hole. And it was there, frozen at the entrance of that camera, that we saw something that I will never forget. A hooded figure, back to us, slowly swinging while chanting that hypnotic song. Around the altar, arranged in a circle, there were objects that initially we could not identify in the dim light. Claire was the first to realize. These are photographs of people. And in fact they were dozens of photographs scattered in a circular pattern. Some clearly old, black and white, some newer, colorful and clear. I recognized some faces, missing people whose cases had been reported over the years in Austin. The hooded figure stopped singing abruptly. He turned slowly toward us, but where a face should be, there was only darkness under the hood. A supernatural cold filled the chamber. "Their names are already known," said the figure in a voice that seemed to come from all sides simultaneously. "You heard the call. Now it's marked. Marcus was the first to react, turning back through the tunnel. The others followed him immediately, but I was paralyzed, mesmerized by that darkness under the hood. The figure raised a skeletal arm towards me, and I could clearly see a mark on his wrist, a spiral surrounded by strange symbols. "Janet!" Claire's scream pulled me out of the trance and ran to join the others. Our escape, desperate for the cave, is a blur in my memory. I just remember that we emerge in the light of day, panting and terrified, swearing never to tell anyone what we have seen. We also promise never to return to that place. But the real fear started a week later. That's when Dylan didn't show up at school. His parents reported his disappearance, saying that he had gone out to run the day before and never returned. Searches extended for weeks, but he was never found. A month later, it was Marcus's turn. He simply did not return home after swimming training. His car was found in the school parking lot, locked with his backpack and cell phone still inside. Claire, Ethan, and I started to despair. The three of us developed the same brand on our wrists, the spiral we saw in the arm of the hooded figure. And every night, we started listening to that song in our dreams, calling us back to the cave. Claire was next. Her parents found her walking a sleepwalk through the streets at 3 a.m., heading toward the caves. After that, they installed alarms in all the doors and windows of the house. 2 weeks later, she disappeared from her room on the second floor. The window was intact. The alarms did not shoot. Simply gone. Ethan and I were paranoid. We began to do desperate research on the symbols we saw in the cave, about ancient rituals, about the history of disappearances in Austin. We have found mentions of a sect that would have existed in the region since before European colonization, worshippers of something they called what they expect in the depths. According to the few records we found, they believed that feeding this entity with human sacrifices would ensure prosperity and longevity for themselves. Ethan disappeared 3 months after our exploration to the cave. I should be next. In despair, I told my parents everything. I showed them the mark on my wrist. To my surprise, my father didn't look shocked. He rolled up his own sleeve, revealing the same brand. "Why do you think I always warned you about the caves?" he said, tears in his eyes. I also heard them when I was about their age. I ran away from Austin for years, but the call always found me. I came back, thinking that I could protect my family by being close, knowing the enemy. But they always take those who mark eventually. The next night, my father led me to a meeting with some of the oldest guides of the Longhorn Caves and other local residents who carried the same brand. They formed a kind of secret society, dedicated to containing what lived in the depths of the caves. "We cannot destroy them," explained an elderly gentleman named Gerald. "We have tried to seal every known entrance, but they always find a way. The only thing we can do is offer a substitute when they call one of us." "Substitute?" I asked, horrified. "Animals," clarified my father quickly. "We offer animals instead of people. It's not ideal, but decreases their hunger, slows the call. Since then, I live with this secret. With each new moon, I accompany my father and the others marked to one of the sealed entrances of the caves. We leave our offerings, usually goats or sheep, and renew the protective symbols that help contain what is down there. The call still comes in my dreams, but weaker now. The brand on my wrist sometimes burns, especially when I'm close to the caves or when someone new is marked. It seems that we are all connected in some way. I know that one day the entity in the depths will get tired of our substitutes. When this happens, I fear not only the marked ones, but all Austin may be in danger. So I share this story, to warn, to record what I know, if one day I also disappear, and to beg, if you hear a strange song coming from the depths of any cave, if you feel an inexplicable boost of following unknown tunnels, resist. Return to the light, because once you hear the call, they know your name, and they are very, very patient. Final thoughts. The depths of the earth have always housed mysteries that challenge our understanding. Places like Longhorn Caves remind us that, as much as we believe to dominate this planet, there are nooks where we are only visitors and visitors not always welcome. The stories we hear today may be difficult to believe for some, but those who have already felt the presence of something indescribable in darkness know that there are truths that science cannot yet explain. If you have ever felt observed in the dark, heard calls that no one else noticed, or found inexplicable marks on your body after visiting old places, know that you are not alone. Share your story with us. Sometimes the first step in understanding the inexplicable is to admit that it exists. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey through the shadows of Austin. If these stories played something in you, whether they have caused goosebumps or aroused memories of their own inexplicable experiences, Consider subscribing to our channel for more reports from the mysteries that inhabit the places we believe to know. Remember, darkness is always lurking, waiting for those who venture too far. Until our next shadow meeting, keep a light on, because sometimes what observes us from darkness is just waiting for the last light to go out.